Hi there, I'm Tracy B. Richards, personal growth counselor and self-love expert, and I'm here with Ross Rosenberg, who is a psychotherapist in Chicago area, author of The Human Magnet Syndrome. You can find out a lot about him on YouTube. And I'm really excited to be able to have this opportunity to sit down with you, Ross, because recently I had the pleasure of attending your workshop. And one of the things that I really wanted to discuss with you today was about relationships. My journey has led me here because of the end of a relationship. That's how I discovered how important self-love is. And one of the things that you said in your workshop had to do with what happens at the end of a devastating relationship and how it makes you feel like you have severe loneliness and withdrawal symptoms. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to chat with you about that and just get your input.
Well, first of all, I'm really happy to do this with you. Was it a year ago that we met in New York filming a Harville Hendrix
That's right, yeah.
Harville Hendrix panel discussion, and you just were like talking about self-love this, self-love that, and I was like thinking, who is this person? She's like obsessed with self-love.
Yeah.
But little did I know I was like obsessed with the Human Magnet Syndrome because I just published my book.
Mm-hmm.
But I came back to Chicago, and the most interesting thing happened as I was working with my clients. I just kept thinking more about the concept of self-love. And it is almost like you gave me a self-love pill.
I love that. Oh, I'm going to use that.
So you asked the question about self-love, and I believe it was about loneliness.
Yes.
One thing that I learned is that loneliness is a core feeling. Well, I call it pathological loneliness. It's the core feeling that someone who has a self-love deficit, or what I call self-love deficit disorder, they're lacking self-esteem, self-respect, and they feel alone in the world when they're not with someone. Mm-hmm. And when they're not with someone, they experience a sense of loneliness that hurts. It's almost like a body feeling. So these people with self-love deficit disorder, which, by the way, I'm not sure if your viewers know, I changed the term codependency. I say codependency no more.
Right.
I don't like the term. It's shaming, it's negative, it's self-love deficit disorder. But the withdrawal symptom that the person with self-love deficit disorder, or the SLD, has is pathological loneliness. It's almost like if you were an alcoholic, the withdrawal symptom is nausea and anxiety. They're both addictions. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have self-love, and you are what people used to call codependent, and you either break up with your dysfunctional mate, who's probably a narcissist, you're going to be hit with that withdrawal symptom of loneliness, pathological loneliness, and that hurts so much, it's going to draw you back to that relationship or make you suffer until you find someone new.
Right. And so as you're speaking, it's really making me think about, so I'm a trained Daring Way facilitator doing the work of Brene Brown, and what she describes as a face-down moment, face mm-hmm. down in the arena, is also what you've described in your workshop as, and in addiction circles, mm-hmm. as hitting rock bottom.
Right.
And really what I wanted to talk more about is how do we rise strong, in Brene Brown's words, based on her most recent book, how do we rise strong after that fall, after that face-down moment, and we are experiencing that devastating feeling of withdrawal and pathological loneliness?
It's an interesting question, because if it would be a simple question if you said, so how do we recuperate from a fall in a relationship, whether it's a breakup, a loss, and how do we avoid feeling lonely, or what I would call pathological loneliness? The problem with that question is it doesn't embrace what I call the core issue. The core issue is not the breakup. The core issue is how much do you love yourself, your level of self-love, and how resilient you are. And I know Brene Brown talks about resiliency and courage and healing a lot. And if you are not that resilient, I am wondering what happened to you in your lifetime that hurt you so much that you can't bounce back from a loss in a relationship and be hopeful and optimistic to find someone else. Because if you don't have that self-love, that confidence, that belief in yourself, you're left with shame and negativity and pessimism, and that is where the loneliness comes about. So, in my estimation, the issue is, why do you feel so lonely when you're not in a relationship? And that's what I try to figure out and discuss with my clients.
Right, right. So one of the things that that the Rising Strong process speaks about. So the tagline of the book, Rising Strong, is the reckoning, the rumble, the revolution. Mm-hmm. So starting with the reckoning, it's starting with that sense of the withdrawal is happening, the loneliness is happening, but reckoning with the fact that, oh my goodness, there is something going on with me. There's an emotional reaction that I'm having, and having that awareness, that self-awareness that there is something really important going on. And that was one of the most miraculous things for me in my self-love journey,
right.
Was that I actually at that moment really, really did reckon with the fact that, okay, all these emotions are, they're devastating, they're painful, but they're trying to tell me something. There's something in my past,
right,
that I really have to understand. And so, how does that fit with your model for recovering after self-love deficit?
My assumption is that if you become aware of your emotions and you connect to your loss and you get to this reckoning stage, you probably have some decent insight into what's happening to you emotionally. And that's where you focus on what is missing in your life that makes you feel so bad when you're alone. Because the truth of the matter is the relationship ended. And there's all sorts of reasons that could explain why. It could be, my fault, her fault, their fault. But what makes us survive and be resilient and manage our emotions is to know that we can move forward and make something of it. Someone who has self-love deficit disorder, a codependent, their self-esteem, their belief in their self-efficacy is very low, and that moment of breakup or following the breakup, the feelings that they're experiencing, perhaps what you're saying, the moment of reckoning, is fear and loss and insecurity. So it's not the feeling and connecting to the feeling that's important. It is finding the courage, is turning those feelings into positive actions and moving forward. And that is about self-love. That is about finding a way to take care of yourself that will counter the feeling. For example, if someone breaks up with you and you feel not good enough, well, that feeling is telling you that you need to work on yourself and find out why you don't feel good enough, because that's where you get stuck.
Right. And at the same time, I think I'm hearing you say that there's a sense of there's this self-talk that goes on, which really is an indicator. If we are self-aware and we are reckoning with our emotions, we are now having a witness to the kinds of things that we tell ourselves,
right.
The story that we make up about whatever that is. And that's another part of the Rising Strong process, is rumbling with that story and finding out, where that story started. And I think that's a real beautiful segue into the self-love deficit disorder and how you kind of migrate, or how did you describe it?
Oh, yeah. I gave a seminar yesterday, and I was so grateful that you flew all the way in
I did.
from Canada to see it. And one of my concepts that I talked about is called paleopsychotherapy.
Paleopsychotherapy, brilliant.
And really, it's just a metaphor that if we are going to discover what's holding us back in our relationships, which usually is what's missing in us, in our self-love deficit disorder, we have to dig through the layers. And like paleontologists looking for dinosaurs, and we have to go through one layer at a time and carefully examine that layer, and that layer will lead to the other, and we will eventually find out what is the original wound or the original condition that caused us to perpetually get stuck as an adult.
Right.
And so I imagine that all of us, whether we're therapists or clients or just anyone listening to this this video, watching this video, if we're going to find out what's holding us back, we have to do a little bit of digging. And because the feelings always come from something. And when we can get to the bottom of that, that's when we can set ourselves free and live in the moment and be present.
Mm-hmm. So that paleopsychotherapy, I see that as part of the excavation of the story
Right.
that we've been carrying around with ourselves, maybe whether it's consciously or unconsciously, that drives that program, that unhealthy program that keeps us in that self-love deficit. And so when we understand what the origins of the story were, and we are rumbling with that story and finding where it begins and where it is, where it's taken us, that we are able to rewrite a new ending to the story.
That's really interesting, because it was just the other day I was talking to a client in a session, and I started to use the term story, is we have to heal our wounds and rewrite our story, because we all, our lives are our story, and we can understand that our history identifies who we are, or we can rewrite it and become what we were meant to be. And when people do the rumbling, as you talked about, the reckoning and the rumbling, or they're digging and sifting through their background, they get a chance to kind of resolve that part of them, that part of their story in which they were weak and feeling hopeless, and metaphorically write the story that they always wanted to be in.
Yeah.
And I love that as a metaphor.
Yeah. And so what is your favorite quote?
Oh, it's by George Eliot.
Yeah.
And I always mess it up, and that's where I need my wife to correct me. But it's never too late to be who you should have been. And I love that quote because it speaks to the heart of self-love. If we were lucky enough to have parents who were perfect, and who has perfect parents, they would have made us feel so perfect ourselves, and we would have had self-love, and we would have become what we wanted to be, that was within our capacity. But not many of us were lucky enough, and we had challenging parents, and we had a difficult childhood, and we grew up not knowing that we were limited, and we became a lesser version of ourselves. So your work with your folks and my work with my folks, we help them understand who they were is not who they should be.
Right.
The story, we can help them rewrite their story, and they can become that version of themselves that if everything went well, it could have happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we finish up, I just wanted to circle back where we started on loneliness. So one of the things that is really important in the Rising Strong process, in the reckoning, is also really being able to understand what emotion that we're in and let ourselves sit in that emotion. So that was a hard period for me, sitting in that loneliness, but I knew I needed to give myself that space.
Right.
Because at the time I didn't realize what I was going through was withdrawal.
Right.
which, you know, that was such a light bulb moment for me when you framed it that way. So just to sort of add that little dimension to it, what's your take on whatever the emotion is, and in this case, loneliness?
Mhm.
How would you help our viewers understand what that process needs?
And I say to your viewers that if you are experiencing loneliness, or what I call pathological loneliness, there's a good reason to believe you're experiencing withdrawals from self-love deficit disorder, or in other words, you're in the middle of a breakup or afraid of a breakup, and that loneliness that you feel is very painful. That loneliness, believe it or not, is really more about what happened to you a long time ago than how you feel now, because it is so deep and so intense and creates so much fear that it reminds you of something that's bigger than this moment. And my advice, my very strong advice, is find a good therapist like Tracy or wherever you are, and to look at that deep feeling of loneliness and trace it back, connect the dots, or do the digging, like in paleopsychotherapy, and let that loneliness guide you to where it started, because that's where the solution is, and that's how it stops.
Right, and I'll add to that, you know, it's a very vulnerable process. And as we've learned, for those of us who have followed Brene Brown over the last few years and really have been touched by her work, the understanding that vulnerability in and of itself is actually courage. Vulnerability and courage occur in the same moment. And it's not going to feel fun, right? I mean, you make this very clear in your workshop. This is a painful process. It's not easy. You do need support. You do need guidance, and in many cases, you need the help of a trained therapist for this kind of work. Additionally, you know, the beauty of the work that I do with Brene Brown's curriculum is she, you know, we are trained to deliver this information in workshop form, in seminar form, in training form. So just go on my website at www.tracybrichards.com to find out more information about where the next training is, where the next workshop is. And you know, that's another really good way of moving through this process, the Rising Strong process.
Well, I am really grateful to have this discussion with you, and I know we're going to have many more. And I love your work, and keep talking about self-love, because as trite as it sounds to some people, it is the condition. The lack of self-love is the condition for so many psychological, emotional problems. And it's so cool to know that someone way up north in Canada is getting what we're talking about in Chicago, and now let's let the rest of the world know.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Ross, for being here with me today, for being my friend, and for validating my passion for self-love, which, you know, when we met was still kind of just my own experience, and now you've taken it and turned it into a real, you know, a real clinical application, which is sitting in that workshop yesterday, and seeing self-love everywhere on those slides was
Right.
an emotional experience for me, and I'm so grateful and honored to be your friend, to be your colleague, and to be working with you in this way. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And of course, I will take this opportunity for a shameless plug. If your
Go
folk
right ahead.
and if your folks want to know more about my work on self-love deficit disorder, just go to advancedclinicaltrainers.com and check out some of my work there. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again. All the best, and practice self-love.